Welcome to Man Talk, the podcast promoting biblical masculinity. In today's episode, we are going to discuss the loving husband. Welcome to Man Talk. So glad that you are joining in with us today. I'm your on-screen producer and co-host, Stephen Vaughn, and I'm joined here with my dad, your featured host, Harold Vaughn. Well, today's discussion, we are going to continue in looking at God's masculine mandate for men. We actually started this back in episode 1. So I would encourage you, if you are just now tuning in, go back to episode 1 and catch up with where we're at. But God's masculine mandate, the way he designed men to be, to exhibit biblical masculinity, is that they would be leaders, lovers, and laborers. And so we've really been actually diving into the one part of that, the love portion of how to love God and love others. And today we really want to dive into what does it mean to be a loving husband. Now, let's be clear here at the very beginning of the episode, this is directed towards husbands, but those who maybe aren't married could benefit from this. Maybe you're sitting there and you're like, I want to be a godly husband one day. These principles could benefit you. And so whether you've been married 50 years or maybe you're dating and want to be a godly husband one day, I would encourage you, these principles could be very beneficial for you. So stick around. But I have a question to lead off with to set us up for the rest of the episode. And I'm going to throw it to you here, Dad. Does marriage have a plan from God? So is God behind marriage? Does he have a plan for it? Or is it just a social contract? You hear that term a lot these days. Is marriage more than just a social contract?
Yes, there's that old joke that says marriage is a fine institution if you're ready for an institution. So certainly marriage is more than a legal thing, more than an institution, and what a sad way to look at it. George Barna said 9 out of 10 Americans believe that marriage is an outdated institution. But marriage is a covenant relationship designed by God. Here we're living in days where people are shacking up and living together, and even in foreign countries, as early as 12 years old, parents allow their children to take up and have a live-in lover because they're not married. But marriage is a covenant between a man, a woman, and God. Now, we're not here to reinvent marriage. We're not here to talk about redefining marriage. We are here to revive marriage. And we have a book here. Here's a shameless advertisement for this book called The Extraordinary Husband, The Extraordinary Husband. And here's a tremendous quote in here. This chapter 7 talks about peace in the palace. Peace in the palace. Now listen to this quote. Your nest may be full or it may be empty, but everyone longs for a nest without thorns. I'll tell you what, a nest without thorns. This is more than an institution. This is a divinely designed relationship that God has brought to mankind for several purposes, procreation being one of them, but everybody's longing for a nest without thorns.
Yeah, I love what you say about marriage being a covenant between a man and a woman before God. And that's really what it is. God designed it that it would be a covenant relationship, and he designed it that it would be between a man and a woman for life is the original intention. Now, we're not here today to get into the weeds to discuss tragedy or things that enter into marriages and can cause them to end. That's not what we're here to do. But we are here today to talk about how you right now in your marriage, as a man who wants to be a biblical Christian man who is exuding biblical masculinity, how you can love your wife well. You know, men are simple beings, I think, sometimes. And my wife and I talk about this all the time. We talk about how men are just simple, you know, like if you feed us, and then, I mean, as far as marriage goes, like food, sex, and like a few other things, just simply like if we have clothes on our back, and that's just how we think. We're just kind of very simple, yet women are not so simple, are they?
Yeah, somebody's made this statement. Before marriage, opposites attract, but after marriage, opposites irritate. And I think there's some truth there. Before you get married, you know, you're attracted to somebody that's not like you. After you get married, you're irritated with people that are not like you. And these differences, there are differences, can cause agitation or friction. Now, here's a quote from that book. Your wife carries a host of invisible and often unspoken concerns, fears, painful memories, and unrealized expectations. This is why the Bible tells us to dwell with our wives according to knowledge, to understand there are differences. And rather than being a source of irritation, we have to dwell with our wives according to knowledge, with understanding, comprehending something of the basic differences. You know, in a unisex society, like a sick society, like we have become the United States of Sodom, all of these gender distinctions have tried to be erased by some, but we need to embrace these differences, understand these differences, celebrate our unique roles, and we need to dwell with our mates according to knowledge, and we need to be loving them like Christ loved the church.
Yes, and loving them the way that I think that they need to be loved is important, and that's kind of what we want to talk about today. You know, some guys might listen to this and they're like, "Well, you know, like that's just not how I work or how I function." And if I could just be quite frank with you, it doesn't matter if that's how you function or not. Your wife needs things differently than you might need them, and we referenced this verse back. It was either the last episode or a couple episodes ago, and we talked about how Christ loved the church from Ephesians 5 and looked at some general principles of how we can love others. But we said in that episode that it was contextually written as a way for husbands to then emulate and then love their wives. And we said that we would come back to it and talk specifically about that. And Ephesians 5:25 is clear. It says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her." And so we looked in those episodes of what it means to love like Christ versus loving like the world, to give ourselves to others. And we talked about hindrances. We talked about the greatest hindrance to love. So I encourage you, go back and listen to this because all this applies to this, and we've been building up to this point. But we all fight our own selfishness. And in Ephesians 5, that's the number one hindrance to love mentioned. And then we all fight, I believe, unbiblical advice and influences of the world. You know, the world says to love this way, or, hey, you can get out of that social contract. And that is not true. There's a quote here by Harold Hockner where he said, "Every husband fights against the challenging realities of life, unforeseen events, aging, economic limitations, family dynamics. But the word love, agape love, means seeking the highest good for another person." And so it really boils down to this, that our love for our wife is not based upon the hindrances or circumstances we find ourselves in. It rises above that because we're supposed to love the way Christ loved us. He loved us in the middle of our sin. He loved us in the middle of our brokenness. And we ought to love no matter what is going on. And so we need to be fighting against these hindrances. And we're going to look at 6 actions today that we can implement into our marriage relationship as husbands to be a loving husband. And the first one is very simple. We've referenced it a little bit in our discussion of love, but the first one is very simple. Loving husbands are committed. And this is where love begins with. It's a commitment. It's a choice. We said last episode that produces action.
Yeah. Stephen, I want to throw something in here. This is excellent. Love is, first of all, a choice, and it's also a binding commitment. But it's a choice and it's a commitment. It's a covenant between God, man, and a woman. Somebody said this, you will come a whole lot closer into acting your way into feeling than feeling your way into acting right. So we need to understand that love is more than a feeling, more than an emotion, more than an attraction, more than just some benefit that we get on the side here. It's a choice. It's a lifelong commitment to God and to a person. And feelings come and feelings go, but who cares how you feel? You got in, you can't get out. This is the design of God for a man and woman to be committed to one another till death do us part.
And it's important to understand, too, that commitment requires sacrifice. You see it right there in Ephesians 5. Love like Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Commitment requires sacrifice. I enjoy hunting, and so I think about the amount of sleep that I forgo during hunting season. This week I took a couple of days off work, and
several days off work.
It was only 2, but I took a couple of days off, and I remember I got up the one morning and I was tired, but I got out there and I saw a large buck. And I couldn't get a shot on him. But the next morning when my alarm went off at 5 and I was like, I do not want to get out of bed right now, that picture of that large buck popped up into my head. And I was like, I'm committed. I'm going to go sacrifice my sleep and I'm going to get up. It's so easy sometimes as men, because I think sometimes we visualize things and can commit to things that we can picture. But it's so important that we see our marriage relationship for what it truly is, and that we are committed and willing to sacrifice whatever for it. And I think that there's an element there of, hey, I enjoy hunting, but if it comes down to hunting or my wife, I need to choose my wife. I want to be a good employee and I want to do a good job at work. But if it comes down to showing up to work one day or taking a day off and attending to my wife if she's having a really hard day, or maybe she has something going on health-wise, if I have the ability to do that, I need to be willing to try and sacrifice if I can for her good, because I want to love her the way Christ loved the church. And so I think this commitment, it requires sacrifice, but I think it's important to understand this too, that for our marriage relationship, I believe commitment brings security. Commitment brings security to those who we are committed to. What do you think about that, specifically about commitment bringing security to a marriage relationship?
Well, yeah, it's confidence. Our spouses should have confidence that they're number one. Christ gave himself. We got to give ourselves and give in and give up some stuff sometimes to prove that. But I think a secure wife has confidence in her husband's commitment to her and to the Lord.
So we need to be committed husbands. But secondly, loving husbands exhibit Christ likeness. Yes, they're committed, but a loving husband, the biblical husband, is going to exhibit Christ likeness. Every husband is to be a spiritual model and guide for his wife. His number one target as a disciple maker, we always talk about being a disciple maker in the church world, right? That's church lingo for going and teaching others how to follow Jesus. The number one person, if we are married, should be our wife. I always say that the number one person in my life who has affected me the most spiritually is my wife. And I would hope that she would say the same, because we're literally living together. And if we both are Christians and loving the Lord, man, she should be the number one target for me to go and to push towards Jesus, to love more, to show what it means to be like Christ, and to exhibit that, to model that for her.
Well, yeah, we can only lead people where we're walking ourselves, and our actions affect our feelings. And, you know, we do, as Glenn Matthews once said, you do right because it is right until it becomes natural. So this walk of marriage and this exhibiting of Christ-like love and behavior should start at home. You love your neighbor as yourself, and your wife is your nearest neighbor, so we ought to be loving her like crazy.
It's important what you said. You can only lead people where you lead yourself. And I think that this is super important. You know, the old picture of the husband as a domineering, authoritarian, do as I say and not as I do, is a very unbalanced picture of what Christ has called husbands to be. He's called us to be so much like Christ that literally following our example would be like following Christ. Mm. And so if you think about that, like that all of a sudden turns the whole dynamic on its head, because it's like, wow, as a husband, am I exempling Christ so much that if she follows my example, that she would be more like Jesus? Because that ups the bar a little bit, I think, when it comes to marriage.
Yeah, well, Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So it's the same thing here. We want to be what we want others to become. And it starts with us. It starts with number one. It starts with self-denial, taking up the cross, following him. And out of that flows right into the marriage relationship. And that's the most important thing.
So loving husbands, they exhibit Christ likeness. But we also want to see that loving husbands will cherish. They will cherish their wives. The English word cherish, it conveys a special type of nurturing that a biblical man should express towards his wife. Cherish means to hold dear, to feel or show affection, to keep or cultivate with care and affection. Now, I know that as guys, sometimes cherishing and affection are words that don't often naturally enter into some of our vocabulary. Some guys are more affectionate than others. Some guys are less affectionate than others. But I still believe that this is an important element of what it means to love our wife. And I don't think this is based on, well, I'm just not that affectionate. I've heard that before. And I know I've even probably said that before, of where like, I'm just not a naturally affectionate person. But is that a good excuse of why I should not cherish my wife?
Well, of course not. The idea of cherish is to nurture, to care for, to show concern, to esteem highly, and all of these things are absolutely imperative. And again, it's independent of temperament type, personality type. Who cares what our personality type is? We're to do right because it is right until it becomes natural, and God will empower us to fulfill these mandates. I mean, every command has the enabling of God behind it. If God's calling us to do something, we have the wherewithal to do it, and we got to go for broke when it comes to cherishing our wives.
And this idea of cherishing, I think, is important too, because it's not passive. This is not a passive verb. This is an active verb. It's an active way of expressing love to my wife. And I'll tell you, affection shows itself in many ways, but affection is best understood when it is shown the way the other person receives it best. And I'll tell you, the best thing that me and Emily read when it came to our marriage and how to show each other affection and love was the 5 love languages I believe it's by Chapman, is just a wonderful book for us. And it was helpful because it talked to me and helped me understand I typically, as a human, I naturally am going to try and show someone love the way that I receive love, because that's how I think about love. But if I hone in and learn how they receive affection, then I can show them affection the way that they need affection to be shown. And it helps they can understand it better. So we are called, loving husbands will cherish their wives, but also loving husbands will seek to be creative. Mm-hmm. They will seek to be creative. Creativeness is important in marriage. This is from Charlotte Bronte. It says, I feel monotony and death to be almost the same.
Yeah, here. This plain vanilla, non-emotional, non-involved, white noise, a kind of approach to the Christian life and to marriage is a killer. For the life of me, I don't understand why this monotonous routine is deemed as godliness. It's almost like we become Stoics in the church, and Stoics sometimes in marriage, to where it's just all of a matter of fact. But to be creative and to keep the pizzazz in marriage, I think it requires some effort. So you can surprise your wife with flowers for no reason. That's a good thing. Watch the kids so she can go out of the house. Just take care to do things that demonstrate that you are loving her, and be creative about it. I mean, she probably enjoys some things that you don't. Like my wife wants to see this Christmas movie, all right? And frankly, I don't like Christmas programs. I don't like Christmas movies as a rule. I just don't. Nevertheless, I told her I'd be willing to go. Now, that's a sacrifice for some of us, okay? I've not gone yet, but...
it's on the list.
I'm willing. Yeah. I'm willing if needed, yes.
Yeah, and I think that it's important, too. This is not something that always requires like thousands of dollars. Like I think sometimes as guys, we're fixers a lot of times naturally, and we're like, think big. And so it's like, oh man, well, if I'm going to be creative, I got to spend like a couple $1,000s, take her to Paris. No, like this can be done on a low scale that still means a lot. Yeah. Low budget that still means a lot. And so like, it involves you understanding your wife, though, which we're about to talk about. But like, if she loves coffee, maybe making her coffee in the morning and bring it to her while she's still in bed, or right after she gets out of bed, before she goes to work, if she has to work, or before she takes care of the kids. Like, these things can be done. You can plan these things, and it doesn't require a lot of money. And loving husbands should seek to be creative. But in order to be creative, I believe that hinges on this next point. And
wait a minute.
Oh, okay.
Here's an idea on the cheap ideas. Do some of the things you did before you got married. I mean, most of us had no money before we got married, yet we came up with all kinds of ways to go to the parkway, or to go for a drive, or to go out to McDonald's or whatever. We can do better than that now, we hope. But do some of the things you did before you got married. They were days when probably finances for most of us were lacking, but it was very meaningful. And it didn't require a lot of expense.
Yeah, that's super good. So next, though, this hinges on the creativeness. Creativeness hinges on this, I should say. Loving husbands should consider their wives. Loving husbands should consider their wives. They should seek to understand them. We already talked about this a little bit, so we're not going to belabor this down the road. But despite what the world says, or your buddies complain about, or you think you know about, you can live with your wife in an understanding way, in a way of knowing her. And that term understanding literally just means to know her, how she is and who she is and how she was created. And so if you want to make your home more like heaven on earth, you should probably begin to start understanding her and knowing her, and stop attempting to change her. It is not our mission in life to change our spouse. Yes, we are to be our spouse's biggest fan and biggest disciple maker, pointing them towards Jesus. But there's some things that only God and the Holy Spirit can change in us. And so it's not necessarily our job to tinker with. And like you said, sometimes the opposites become the biggest irritation later in marriage. Instead, it's best to understand her and to know how she is created, so then I can best be creative. I can best cherish her. I can best show her Christ-likeness. All these things, it kind of hinges on this idea that I would consider and understand my wife.
Yeah, well, every human being craves three things: love, acceptance, and forgiveness. I'll tell you what, people are going to go where they find love, acceptance, and forgiveness. And the home should be the primary care center for these three virtues: loving, accepting, and forgiving.
And we need to understand our wives so that we can best apply these things. So we need to consider, and loving husbands should consider and seek to understand their wives. But we can't forget the last one. That's this, that loving husbands need to compliment. They need to compliment their wives. Compliments make a big deal. The standard is high, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Start by learning about Christ's love for his church. Then you'll have a better understanding of what it takes to love your wife, what it means to see the best in her. And I think that's interesting, is Christ gave himself up for his church, for us. And just to be quite frank, I don't think that we're that special sometimes. I don't think I'm that special sometimes. Just living with myself and knowing some of the ways that I mess up and some of my inconsistencies. But Christ saw the value in me. And I think sometimes it's not necessarily about us, and that sometimes we feel, man, what am I going to compliment my wife about? Well, it goes back to understanding and considering my wife. But if I consider her and understand her and who God made her to be and who she is, and not just focus on her imperfections or inconsistencies, because I have just as many, that's when I can start to compliment her, and I can start to see the value, see the good in her, like Christ saw the good in me. Or I shouldn't say good because we were sinful, but the value, I should say, in me.
Yeah, remember Isaac and Rebekah? And he had gone and lied about his relationship to her, and the king found out about it when he saw them sporting. That means playing, laughing, having a big time. And you know what? We should really focus on enjoying the journey. We should consider our marriage an opportunity for celebration.
Man, that's so good. We need to be complimenting, and we need to be actively complimenting our wives. So today, as we've looked at these things, things. When it comes to commitment, how are you going to display your commitment to your wife? Remember, it brings security, but it's displayed by sacrifice. And so back that up with sacrifice. How are you going to display Christ likeness? Are you going to example what it means to be like Christ to your wife and to be her biggest discipler? And cherish your wife. Are you going to love her and show her love the way that she needs to be shown love? Are you going to step up to the plate and communicate your affection to her? Are you going to be creative?
Well, wait a minute, Stephen.
Yeah.
On the cherish point, learn to listen. Don't dissect everything your wife says. Learn to listen to what she means instead of what she says, because some people have a hard time verbalizing and expressing what they really mean. So don't listen to their words only, listen to their heart.
Yeah, that's so good. And remember to take this home, be creative. Cherish her, be creative. Don't give in to monotony. Consider and understand her. Become her biggest student. Remember what it was like when you were dating her and how you needed to know everything about her and you went around to her friends and all that stuff. That's how we should still treat our wives. And remember to compliment her, to show her that you see the value in her. Well, today we did want to deal really quickly with this question that we had received. And remember, if you want to submit a question, you can do so on our website. That's www.mantalkpodcast.com. This one actually came through our YouTube channel, and it's from one of our faithful followers, Christian. And he asked if we could speak a little bit to how being healthy and watching over our health plays into the masculine mandate and biblical masculinity. And so I just wanted to answer really quickly. Christian, we do want to dive more into this, hopefully in a future episode. But specifically, we need to understand some things when it comes to our health. First of all, that we are image bearers of God. God created us in the beginning in his image. So we carry this image, but sin also has broken down our world and our bodies. So we are not perfect image bearers. So we do have issues. This displays itself in health issues, other things. And so we do need to remember that not all of us are going to be Mr. Universe or Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we all look different and have different metabolisms, different makeups. But I think that it comes down to this one thing, and that's stewardship. Stewarding ourselves well. I think it's very interesting that in the Bible, God mentions that we are created with mind, body, and soul. And we are holistic beings. And yes, we need to focus on being close to God spiritually, but also if our mind and body aren't taken care of, this can lead to issues. And so when it comes to our health, we need to steward ourselves. Look at the Old Testament. Much of the law is centered around health and dietary. That's right. Dietary laws. Why? So that it could keep them safe and healthy. And then you go to the New Testament and you see the stewardship of our body principle in 1 Corinthians 6. It's specifically talking about sexual immorality, but the point plays through still the same when it comes to health. And that's this, that we were created as a temple, the house of God, and that his spirit resides in each of us as believers. And so if we are specifically created, we're image bearers of God, and we are a temple of the Holy Spirit, we ought to take care of our bodies.
Yeah, well, bodily exercise profits a little. There's a benefit to it. Stephen, Americans are the sickest people on the earth. We're the sickest nation in the world. We spend more and we get less, and because of the neglect of the laws of nature and the laws that God has put in play in his universe, if you neglect your body and abuse your body, you're going to reap consequences. So I think that's very, very important that we do what we can to maintain health, try to eat right, exercise, get some sleep, oversee our spirit to where we're not in conflict within ourselves.
Exactly. So remember, if you have a question, you can submit that to us and we'll try and deal with as many as we can throughout our show. Well, thank you for joining us today on Man Talk. We do want to thank our distributing partner. They made all of this possible with our studio and things, and they even have this show on their streaming app and on their TV station in Wisconsin. That's VCY.TV out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thank you so much for helping us and for airing this and for all of the support that you have given to us to help make this possible. If you want to look them up and look up their info, it's VCY.TV. Well, the best way to get connected with us is through our social media, and that's the best way to get connected to all of our social media, our Let's try that all over again. We're in the recording studio here. The best way to get connected to all of our content is through our social media. You can get clips and all these things. And so the best place to find all of our links to social media is our website. That is www.mantalkpodcast.com. That's what the homepage looks like. And you can get connected to all of our social media. We're on Instagram, X, Facebook, and we also are on Apple Podcast and Spotify. On Apple, remember, 5-star rating and reviewing helps us out a whole lot. Do that for us. That's great. And our video content is chiefly hosted on YouTube, and you can find our channel at Man Talk Pod. Remember to like and subscribe and click the notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all of our new content. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we will see you in our next episode as we discuss the loving Father.